I have a fairly healthy and robust discourse with myself about my identity and what it means to be an immigrant in Australia and Caribbean and all kind of thing, right? I can do that. But what I realized was incredibly complex in that experience was I was like, I don't know how I could deal with all of that stuff, but actually be born here, right? And the difference for somebody like Maxine, when you are born into a place like Nelly, right? When you are born into a country that is telling you you don't belong all the time. And it's like, where can I turn to? Because I have enough places to turn to. I turn away all the time, right? I can grasp onto the things that I hold dear about my identity that exist external to Australia. So, because it can't hurt me, right? It's defense mechanisms and all of that, right? But when you are born here, it is an incredibly different conversation.
Ben Etherington here, co-producer of Caribbean Echoes, a History Lab series that delves into the lives of Caribbean Australians. We're listening to the Jamaican-Australian actor Zahra Newman at an event launching Caribbean Echoes at the Abercrombie Hotel in Sydney that we recorded in October. In the third episode of Caribbean Echoes, which is about the mid-20th century cabaret star Nellie Small, Zahra plays Nellie's interior voice as imagined by series producer Sienna Brown. Here, she's reflecting on playing the role of Maxine Beneba Clark in an adaptation of Clark's memoir, The Hate Race, which is all about growing up Caribbean in suburban Australia. It's part of a wide-ranging conversation with me, Sienna, and the playwright Alana Valentine about the series and about Caribbean Australian experiences now. In this episode, we bring you an edited version of our conversation. Opening proceedings is Tamsin Peach, the host of History Lab and managing director of UTS Impact Studios.
Welcome to this launch of the History Lab podcast series Caribbean Echoes. It's fantastic to see so many people here. We had to move rooms, which is a great sign. We acknowledge that tonight we meet on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay tribute to the knowledge that has been here, made here for many tens of thousands of years, and to elders past and present. Our shared struggles to find better ways to live together in this place must begin with that fundamental acknowledgement. Some of you may have listened to History Lab before. Others of you will be new to it. So for those of you who don't know, we launched it back in 2018, wanting to start a new kind of platform for public history in Australia. And so since then, we've made 6 seasons with over 30 episodes, I think, and won a bag of awards, which I hope Caribbean Echoes will add to, including at the New York Radio Festivals, the New South Wales Premier's History Awards, and most recently we won the gold medal at the International Signal Awards. So, yeah, exactly. And we're very, very proud that Caribbean Echoes has joined the stable, what we're now calling History Lab Originals. So if you listen to the History Lab feed, you'll now hear these wonderful, deep narrative investigations like Caribbean Echoes. You'll also hear History Lab Live, events like this. So hello, if you're listening on the feed. And we're also pioneering or launching a new format called History Lab Studio, which is studio conversations. Now, Caribbean Echoes. If you haven't listened already, it's a really beautiful 4-part series that follows the lives of Caribbean Australians who arrived in the second part of the 19th century. And the picture these podcasts paint of Australia is one that is both familiar and kind of strange and unsettling. On the one hand, we confront the racism that structured so much of social and political life in Australia then, as indeed now. And on the other hand, we also find Australian communities and individuals that are intimately connected with other parts of the empire and the world. And we discover men and women who navigated these economic, political and cultural landscapes with courage and creativity. And we learn how they helped change those landscapes. I finished listening to the series and I thought, how might the stories we tell of Australia and of Australians change if these figures are given the prominence they once had? So it's not about recovering them, because they were very prominent and public figures in their time. It's about remembering the place that they had and thinking about why we've forgotten that place. If the boxer Peter Jackson is remembered as the icon he once was, if the singer Nellie Small is given the status she once had, and if the formerly, this is my favourite episode, Susanna Andrews is acknowledged for, amongst other things, as the grandmother of the AFL footy great, Vic Thorpe. I think telling these stories matters, and it matters now more than ever. Because if as a community we are to face the challenges that confront us, challenges that are about our relationship to nature and to each other, then it is critical that we understand that the systems that structure our lives and our communities are not natural or inevitable, but that they have been made, and that therefore they can be unmade, especially when we act together. And that's why stories like those you'll hear tonight and those you'll hear in the series are so important. They talk about power, they talk about how it comes to be, and they also talk about how it can be and has been refashioned. But that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to introduce the panellists. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Etherington, and welcome to Caribbean Echoes Live. I am thrilled to be joined by so many friends, colleagues, audio buffs, but particularly people from the Caribbean community here in Sydney who found out about this event. At its core, I think this podcast series is about you, and it's about recovering and paying tribute to stories of Caribbean Australians that go all the way back to that auspicious year, 1788, that tragic year. And I also want to pay tribute, acknowledge, and assert as ever that this is Gadigal country and these are unceded sovereign lands. I'm Ben Etherington. I found my way into being a great lover of Caribbean literature, particularly Caribbean poetry. And for that reason, I've been drawn into this wonderful world of Caribbean culture, and that put me in touch with my collaborator for this series, and really the person whose creative vision is at the heart of it, and that is Sienna Brown. So Sienna was born in Kingston, Jamaica. She moved to Canada as a teenager, where she trained as a professional dancer. Tonight, we're really going to be focusing on performance elements and a performance strand of this series. And Sienna worked with top dance companies as a younger woman, still a young woman, but as a younger woman. When she moved to Australia, she expanded her creative portfolio to screen media, and then to the whole world of Australian history, because she worked at Hyde Park Barrack Museum for a while, where she noticed that there were a whole lot of West Indians, that is, people from the English-speaking Caribbean, in the logs of convicts. And that led her to write a historical novel, Master of My Fate. It's must-reading for all readers of and lovers of Australian literature. That won a Emerging Writers Prize at the Adelaide Writers Festival. And for the last few years, Sienna's been collaborating with me on a show for the ABC called Caribbean Convicts. And tonight she is the purveyor of the goods called Caribbean Echoes. So welcome, Sienna. I'd want to introduce our other two panellists before we properly get started. So Alana Valentine is one of the really standout star voices in this series. She's the key driver of the narrative of episode 3 on Nellie Small, and we're going to be focusing on that tonight. And she has a long and celebrated career in the theatre. One of the many highlights is working with acclaimed First Nations performer Ursula Jovich on Barbara and the Camp Dogs, which toured nationally, was the recipient of several Helpman Awards, including Best Original Score and Best Musical, and 4 Green Room Awards in Melbourne. I can't even get to the end of the sentence without running out of breath. It was so garlanded. You can see from that Alana is very adept at musical theatre. I think has worked on opera, has worked in many forms. The key show that has brought her into this series is Send for Nellie. So if you listen to the 3rd episode of the series, we really structure it around our discussion with Alana and then going to see a performance of Alana's Send for Nellie, which premiered at the Sydney Festival at the beginning of last year. So Alana, we are so pleased to have you with us tonight. And finally, Zahra Newman, who was born in Port Antonio, Jamaica, and she moved to Australia at the age of 14. She is the interior voice of Nellie Small as imagined by Sienna in that third episode. And also, I think Zahra speaks to the ongoing history of cultural movements between the Caribbean and Australia, because upon arriving in Australia, she finished school, then she went to the Victorian College of the Arts, and now she's one of our great theatre and screen actors. Notable works include her performance as Nabalungi in the original Australian cast of the Book of Mormon, and The Hate Race, which was adapted from Maxine Beneba-Clark's memoir. And it has to be said, she did an amazing job playing all 23 parts in the one-woman show of Dracula with the Sydney Theatre Company last year. If you saw that, it was true theatrical virtuosity and a lot of hard work.
Yes, 20,000 words.
All right, so you've already heard me talk a lot, and we're not here for me. Just to get us started, I want to hear, we're all performers in different phases of our lives tonight, and I want to hear from each of the panel about a scary, tenuous, an exciting, a fun moment that you've experienced as a performer on stage. I'll be the sacrifice poet. I was racking my brain for my very short-lived classical music career, and it was simply that I played the bassoon, a wind instrument. I had a big solo. I think it may have been in a Shostakovich symphony, and there was a moment where the bassoon is all alone, and I just kind of learned how to properly get a sound out of my instrument, and I came in with absolute perfect pitch, big sound, filled the auditorium with music 2 bars early. And it was the most confident entrance. And everybody was like, what? And I stopped, and then I counted out 2 more bars. I kept going, and I spent the rest of that performance looking very red in the face. So that's my scary moment on the stage.
That's what we call strong and wrong in the theatre world.
Yes.
Strong, that's what you want to be. I have one that, I have quite a few. But when I have my shoulder dislocated on stage by a fellow actor on my entrance.
Oh.
So I entered the stage, realized that my shoulder was dislocated, and then I couldn't move my arm or anything like that. And so that was a adrenaline rush like never before. Other highlights include getting lost inside of a set that has multiple panels, going through the wrong door when it's actually a false door, so it's just a wall, and having to close the door behind me because it's on a revolve. Anyway, yeah, so there's a few.
Labyrinthine mistakes. Alana.
2018, my play The Sugar House is on stage at Belvoir. It's a family play, and in it a grandmother gets a big opportunity for her granddaughter, and we're at the scene where the granddaughter is about to tell the grandmother that she doesn't want the opportunity. And the grandmother, played by the remarkable Chris McQuaid, picks up a fork and sticks it in her own hand. This is in the script. And every time she did it, the audience would gasp, like she stuck it right in, strong and right, you know. But the audience would gasp. So on this particular occasion, it was the designer had created a false hand, because you may have heard of the retractable knives that we use in theatre. There are no retractable forks. So she'd created a fake hand, and during the scene, Chris would surreptitiously move the fake hand into place so the audience couldn't see it, and then stab hard into this jelly-like sort of substance. Well, this particular matinee, she stuck it in, the audience gasped, and then the fork popped back out. And so she looked at it and then stuck it in again. And the audience gasped again, and I was in the audience having convulsions.
Yeah. There was no blood, though.
No blood.
No
It was
blood.
a fake arm.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I did have a number of them, and I thought, well, what I might do is actually talk about when I was a dancer. And I'd choreographed a piece called Waiting, which was a solo work. It was about 15 minutes long, and it was waiting, presumably for your lover. but was really about those moments, those in-between moments. You know, something's about to come, the storm, the sunlight, the rain, whatever it is, or the person, and then they finally arrive. But it's that in-between, that liminal space that is really interesting. I'd performed it so many times, and nothing ever went right. It was just one of those performances. And then finally, this one night, it happened. As a performer, when that happens, when the inside and the outside actually come together and you're in the moment, which is so rare for all of us because, you know, we're always thinking, doing whatever. So I just thought, when I was thinking about all the awful things, I thought that was the one that came up. And I thought, yay. And that's sort of what we were trying to actually do with the podcast, was create those moments where hopefully for 45 minutes you are suspended a little bit. Maybe you've gone back in time. Maybe you've learned something you didn't know. Maybe your heartstrings were plucked a little bit. But yeah.
That's a very Sienna Brown scary moment, which is actually a beautiful moment of achievement and flourishing on stage. I don't need to think about a seg because it comes from your heart, and that has steered where we've gone with this series. So, Sienna, I just want to just remind me, how did you go about researching and then finding the stories of Peter Jackson, Nellie Small, Susanna Andrews that we've ended up featuring?
Yeah, look, I was thinking about that today, and I thought, you know what, it really has to do with this ultimate theme of belonging, of being a migrant, of being someone who isn't born into the country that you've ended up living in. And in a way, that's kind of the driving theme of Caribbean Echoes, are people who, yes, Nellie was born here, but it was always this feeling of, what am I doing here? I don't really belong. We're such a small group. And it sounds so victim-like, but it's not coming from that space. It's actually coming from a space of, well, how can I belong? How can I feel comfortable being here? And particularly for Caribbean people in the room, I think you understand as a very small minority, you know, and having come from Canada, where it's huge. I would walk out of my flat and there'd be a Caribbean person. It was like everywhere. We were everywhere, right? So you get here and I don't see nobody, you know, and there was no patties, there was no rum punch, there was no curry goat. You know, I could keep going. And then, you know, you were the one that suggested Peter Jackson. And I think, you know, taking it from there, we then started to look at the other people who could be part of that.
So Peter Jackson is the key figure who we focus on in the first episode of Caribbean Echoes. Listen to the full episode to get a sense of his life, but go and read Bob Peterson's really meticulous, rigorous biography to get the full story of Peter Jackson, which is simply remarkable. I mean, it's a film script that writes itself, his life. Because we're going to move shortly to Nellie Small, this great performer, something I just want to quickly just rest on for a moment with Peter Jackson, because it's so unexpected, is that he turned to performance at a key moment of his life. So Peter Jackson had just beaten a guy called James Corbett and then Paddy Slavin in 1891 and 1892. In order to keep his income going, he turned to theatre. And he performed in a production of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is actually just one moment of being a performer in Peter Jackson's life, that he went through his life putting on different masks. Sienna, I just wonder if you have any thoughts about Peter Jackson as a man who wore masks, as a man who, in a sense, had to perform an identity.
Yeah, well, look, I think I want to bring it back to this idea of the narrative, which is about belonging. As Caribbean people, we learn how to duck and weave between the lines. A lot of migrants do. But I think particularly Caribbean people were really good at that. I'm not sure where that originates. Was it from the plantation slavery days that we've got, you know, deep inside us? But I think with Caribbean people, we blend really easily. We can be rebels as well, of course, but we can also really blend. And I think with Peter Jackson, that's really what he was doing in the way that he dressed, in the way that he decided he wanted to be a gentleman. And The other side of that is that when you do mask yourself all the time to fit in, and it's not that you are no longer a Caribbean person, it's just that you can veil, that's what it feels like to me anyway, that you veil yourself to be part of a community. And I think Peter veiled himself in his clothing to be the antithesis of the boxer. And to me, that's what I got a lot out of Peter, I think. Yeah.
Let's go to Nellie Small now,
Yes,
because
please.
everybody on the panel tonight was
Yes.
involved in this episode,
Yeah.
episode 3 on Nellie Small. And Alana, we'll come to you in a moment, but if we could just hit play on a little excerpt from the episode. We're going to hear Nellie Small herself being interviewed on ABC radio in the 1950s. But I just want you to hear her voice and then hear the voice of Zahra giving representation to Nellie's interiority. So, Simon, can we just have a listen to that?
Well, now, how did you start in show business originally? Weren't you with Eora, Mike Connors and Queenie Paul?
Yes, well, prior to joining that company, I won an amateur trial at a little theatre in Oxford Street. We used to call it Clay's Variety. At that time, Clay's, Fuller's, they had the theatre tied up. And I started there. Old Clay had died in the meantime. So I went to Connors and Paul and got a job with them. I stayed with them for 7 weeks. And then that was one of the few times I wore a frock in a production. I was singing Am I Blue, and Queenie got the idea that she should dress me up as a mammy. So away I went. Bandana around the head and a basket of cotton on the stage. I was told that they put on novelties, and I couldn't see that I was a novelty, but it was pointed out to me that my colour was.
People said to me that my colour was. And I love the way Nellie puts that too. She doesn't say I was, she says people told me I was. And even from the beginning, she's sort of asserting her ability to control how she's seen, which I really loved.
I never think of myself as being exotic or unusual in any way. But people see me like that. And then I realize what they're looking at. They're putting me in some kind of box with my fuzzy-wuzzy hair, chocolate-colored skin. A box that not only constrains me but makes me feel like I have to justify myself. Justify my place in the world. Continuously prove I'm worthy of respect. Isn't striving to be good at what I do enough?
Woohoo!
So, Alana, we'd heard about Peter Jackson kind of being channeled into this role of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And we just heard Nellie being interviewed in the 1950s about how she gets established in theatre and how this woman, Queenie Paul, who was quite instrumental in supporting her career, nevertheless is involved in what seems to be a kind of typecasting. And my question is, as you've explored in such detail Nellie Small's life and been inspired by it, could you tell us a little bit about that journey that she made from just getting a start in the theatre to becoming the Nellie Small who was a kind of national darling? How did she manage to transcend that kind of typecasting?
So Nellie was born in 1900 and she died in 1968. And in 1930, as she said in the podcast, she started to perform on stage, especially in nightclubs and in cabaret venues. And she started dressing as a man both on stage and off stage. So in that time, there was a kind of quite a few women were cross-dressing, it was called. And so she was a really exciting figure and a great singer for Sydney. She had a beautiful singing voice. And by the 50s, she was actually headlining at Sammy Lee's. Some of you will know in Woollahra, and you're heading up to Bondi Junction, there's a building on the left which was Sammy Lee's nightclub, and the headline act of a nightclub was basically the person who drew in the customers, and then all the other acts sort of supported her basically. So she really was a big star. But yeah, Nellie was aware of the racialisation of her, even though she was also cross-dressed. So there was a different sort of, she was mistaken for a man. But by the 50s, this is an article, you can all get it on Trove. There's quite a lot of material. If you don't know, the National Library of Australia have got a portal that you can go and research Nellie Small. But just to read from Nellie so that we continue to put Nellie's voice, she talks about a time she was coming back from a tour of New Zealand and the customs officials wouldn't believe that she'd been born in Australia, and they made her fill out a visitor's permit, which was you cover in the podcast. But she also, when she was in New Zealand, she was introduced to a fellow Australian, and Nellie says here that the tourist spat after she was introduced to him as a fellow Australian. A New Zealander seated nearby jumped up, floored the man with a punch, and bellowed, "We don't treat anyone like that in this country." And she talked a lot about how much she enjoyed being in New Zealand. And she says this great thing, "I'm proud of my Australian birth, but I'd be much happier if more of my fellow countrymen would forget my skin colour is different from theirs and sit down to hear my views on life and people." So, when I spoke to Jimmy Somerville, who toured with her, and it's in this article as well, she's not allowed in a lot of the hotels where she's just performed. She's not allowed to stay there. She can't go into the Brisbane GPO and pick up her mail. Nellie became quite vocal about that in her life.
We'll come to Zen for Nellie in a moment, but something that we did do that's sort of beyond the research that Alana so generously shared through the interview, we worked with Vanessa Casson, who's here tonight from the Society of Australian Genealogists. Big shout out to you, Vanessa, who did wonderful work to actually go through the archival records and work out where Nellie's ancestors came from. And it turns out that they arrived in the 1850s as free migrants from Barbados and from Antigua. And so when we were trying to work out how to give voice to some of the interior thoughts that we imagine would be in dialectic with what Nellie had to do when she was in the public place, we decided that we'd make a brave choice and actually render that interiority in a Caribbean accent, really to indicate the distance between Nellie's voice itself and that Caribbean route through which we were thinking about her. And that brought us to Zahra Newman.
Yes.
Now, Zahra, you are not an expert on the life of Nellie Small.
No, I am not.
So you're not here to answer questions about Nellie, but I wonder how you thought about the process of giving voice to this person who we can hear in recordings and what you were trying to channel. Maybe some of your own experiences, I don't know, as you were giving voice to that.
I think it's always difficult, right? So this is probably the second time that I've had to portray somebody who's a real person, a person that was actually alive, which is an incredibly daunting thing to do because there's a lot of responsibility when you have to do something like that. But I think the thing as a performer always to remember is that you're never actually going to be that person. And so what you have to try to do is find a balance, right? Because you want to honor the specificities of who that person was while also honoring whatever story it is that you're trying to tell about that particular person in a particular time, and also fulfill the kind of contextual things around the larger production that you're engaged in. And so I think for me, it was about working with Sienna's goal, I guess, to really bring to the foreground the Caribbean part of somebody who you can very clearly hear in that playback is Australian, right? Like there's no doubt about that. And there are colonial aspects of that. There's influence of the kind of sonic specificities of an Australian voice in that time. It's kind of about a balance, and I don't know how else to describe it apart from like a very flexible, elastic band that you expand and contract until you find something that satisfies the need to sort of bring that Caribbeanness to the foreground, but also communicates the objectives and feelings and wants of that person, what's necessary for the story. Because the trap in any accent work at all is that you just do the sound rather than, doing what what the person's trying to achieve in their particular scene or whatever. So,
Well, just to add a note to that, because Zahra was also able to replicate Nellie. So we did rehearsals around it, and it was pretty close. But the feeling was that we want an interior space. I mean, there's no way it could be Nellie. And then that would get very confusing. It wasn't that kind of style.
Yeah, it's one of the great challenges of, I guess, creative nonfiction versus historical documentaries. I think of these as primarily creative pieces that are historically grounded and rigorous. But the good thing is there was no confusion about whether this was trying to be an invented interior voice of Nellie Small. It was an act of imagination, and I think that comes through in that elasticity, Zahra. There's a moment when Zahra reads out a letter. Alana starts reading the letter, and then Zahra comes in with the more Australian accent that Nellie spoke with in public, and it's, I think, one of the most beautiful moments in the series. So I think let's think about the scene now for Caribbean Australian people in Australia, but particularly Caribbean people on stage. And Zahra, I want to ask you about your experiences a moment, but firstly, Send for Nellie. So Send for Nellie is a cabaret show. It's not a play about Nellie Small's life. It's emulating the form in which Nellie herself was on the stage. So Alana, can you give us a bit of an insight into the creative process? So you had this great passion and love for Nellie as a public figure. You've done all this research to think about her. What was the translation to I'm going to actually take that leap now and make a creative work about her life?
I'd been trying to get a play up about Nellie for 20-something years and been told that, it wouldn't be a commercial idea. And we used to walk past a box that had Nellie's name on it in my corridor, and I would sometimes go, I know, I'm still going, Nellie, I know. So the Sydney Festival offered us a cabaret space, and without going into a long thing about how licensing works in Australia, we couldn't write a play with songs about Nellie like you would have seen the wonderful Zahra in Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill, which was a play with songs. We could do a cabaret. So we had Nellie singing the songs. It's completely different licensing. Are there any APRA AMCOS members in the audience? Yeah, they will know what I mean. Australian songwriters are everywhere, that's why I say. But so we wanted to have Nellie sing the songs and tell something of her life. And so there's like little snapshots through the cabaret. Again, you can't have a through line in a cabaret because then it's considered dramatic context. But what was exciting for me was as much the way everybody became very passionate about the rediscovery of Nellie and the fact that she was this cross-dresser. She was also a queer icon, really, for a lot of Sydney people. And so the ABC TV did a story on it. The Herald did a big front page. So it put Nellie back on the cultural sort of map. People started asking, why don't we know about this person? And I thought that was really great. And that letter you talked about came out of a woman contacting me and saying, oh, you're doing this show about Nellie Small. My father was a saxophonist. He made some soup for Nellie when she was sick in hospital, and I've got a letter of thanks. So that was that letter. So what I'm trying to say is that it's as much the artefact on stage, the cabaret is a wonderful thing, but it's all the publicity, all the discussion, all the people who start to say, oh, yes, I knew Nellie Small. And she comes back into our culture as this vibrant, wonderful contribution. So, yeah, I think
I love that, particularly the dialectic between archival history, oral history, which, of course, you'd done previously, creative work, and then that itself brings in another wave of oral history and documentation. So it shows how creative process can actually interact with history making.
Yeah, I'd love someone to let me do a play with songs, or in collaboration, with someone, because I think she is a commercial idea and always was.
Never know.
Always was.
Watch your space.
Yeah.
Yes.
Zahra, I'd like to come to your experiences about which you can speak as openly as you'd like. You grew up in Jamaica and you came here as a 14-year-old, and in a totally different period and in a totally different way, nevertheless, like Nellie, you've had to work your way through the existing systems, through the existing ways in which people might read you as a Caribbean person. Thinking about Nellie Small, the pathway she travelled from 1900 to 1968 and the pathway you've travelled, is there anything there that has kind of provoked you or made you think about what it's been like?
Look, I mean, the thing that really stands out, the thing that remains the same is the feast and the famine, right? Which is something that comes out in the podcast, right? And that remains the feast and the famine. You have to constantly recommit to being a performer, because the barometers of success, achievement, and stability are constantly being undermined or challenged, or and something else that, you know, we heard in the excerpt that I think remains the same is the politicization of my body when I walk out on stage. I don't actually think people read me as a Caribbean person when I step out on stage. I don't think they know exactly what, but they just know it's not quite what they expect, right? It's more question. And that was actually something that it took me a very long time into my career to be able to actually articulate that that's what was happening, why I was having this frustration, because I've been very lucky to play a plethora of characters. Contrary to other people's experiences in drama school, I was not in a constant version of Tituba, you know, just playing variations on Tituba. I was very fortunate to play lots of different characters that had actually nothing to do with my race. And that was happening in my professional life, but I was feeling it, right, from the audience and feeling it inside of the rooms. And I realized that it's because it doesn't matter actually how good I am at the accent, what the actual relation, what the story is that we're telling on stage. When I walked out on stage and I was the only non-white person on stage, everybody in the audience was designating me with meaning. They were politicizing me and creating meaning and creating narratives around how I fit in, what was my role, what was my power. I mean, as an example, in one of the first major roles that I had in a main stage company, I could hear the two women in the front row saying, "Who is she? What is she doing here? Why is she playing this role? What is going on?" They had the programs out, like, what? You know, in a Noel Coward, right? Because they come to see the Noel Coward. And I don't fit the thing of the Noel Coward, right? They want to see their thing. And I guess there's a relationship to that I think a lot of non-white actors have to navigate. And the conversation that you have with that politicization changes. And, you know, and for me, it became about having power and agency in deciding what kind of roles and jobs that you want to do and how and when you want to be politicized, and trying to claw back some of the power that you can't control. I realized after a time, I'm doing all these shows, but I always play the outsider. Like I always play the sister that nobody likes, or the girl that, you know, no, but yeah, always on the outside, right? Because it made sense subconsciously. That casting, it made everybody feel okay about this person being on stage, you know, and so that was like, that happens in like Chekhov's and stuff like that, you know, in the classic kind of. So I think that's something that remains, right? It doesn't necessarily happen in exactly the same way that it would happen for somebody like Nellie. I have been asked to play Tituba, but I declined. But it's still the political body, right? In a way that my Anglo-Celt counterparts do not necessarily have to engage in that conversation with themselves every time when they're in their jobs. What does this mean? What do I mean? What am I communicating? How am I going to counteract that? I can't really counteract that. Okay, so how do we do this? You know, yeah.
It's a lot of problem solving on top of the emotional labour and I guess the political labour you're also talking about. When it came to playing the character of young Maxine Beneba Clark in The Hate Race, was that a different kind of experience?
Yes. Anybody who doesn't know, Maxine Beneba Clark is a Australian writer. She was born in Australia. She grew up in Western Sydney, and she wrote a memoir called The Hate Race about her experiences growing up as a child of British Caribbean parents and really not having diaspora, and being bullied and school and all that sort of stuff, right? And we turned this into a stage production. And the thing that really, really stood out to me in doing that show was I have a fairly healthy and robust discourse with myself about my identity and what it means to be an immigrant in Australia and Caribbean and all kind of thing, right? I can do that. But what I realized was incredibly complex in that experience was I was like, I don't know how I could deal with all of that stuff, but actually be born here, right? And the difference for somebody like Maxine, when you are born into a place like Nelly, right? When you are born into a country that is telling you don't belong all the time. And it's like, where can I turn to? Because I have enough places to turn to. I turn away all the time, right? I can grasp onto the things that I hold dear about my identity that exist external to Australia. So, because it can't hurt me, right? It's defense mechanisms and all of that, right? But when you are born here, it is an incredibly different conversation. So that for me really came to the foreground, but also on a really selfish and personal level, I was thrilled to be able to speak in my natural accent on stage. That was very freeing for me. I don't get to do it often, despite casting briefs that insist they want you to speak in your natural accent. They don't want me to speak in my natural accent because if they hear me speak like this, they start asking questions instead of listening to what I'm saying. So, yeah, there was a lot of... exorcism is probably too strong a word, but like freedom of me being able to fulfill a lot of things that perhaps I didn't even necessarily think I needed to fulfill, that I was able to vicariously through Maxine's work. Yeah.
A couple of episodes we haven't touched on tonight. I'll just mention one because it's relevant to something I want to say about attending the hate race and how much I loved it. The second episode we talk about First Nations connections with West Indians going back to the second half of the 19th century, particularly John Maynard, Warramie man from Newcastle Way, talks about connections between First Nations people and West Indian dock workers who introduced, amongst other things, the ideas of Marcus Garvey to Australia, which were important for First Nations politics. The reason I raise that is there is the most wonderful, at the beginning of that play, acknowledgement of country that I have seen on the Australian stage, where Zahra playing Maxine, or almost like pre-Maxine, like narrator, warming up for Maxine, gives a phenomenal weaving of the memory of the Middle Passage of the enslaved from Africa to the Caribbean, with acknowledging dispossession on Aboriginal lands in Melbourne. And
that was also very deliberate. We were hyper conscious that we were telling a story about belonging, that we weren't necessarily going to deal with indigeneity inside of the show, right? But that there were connections and networks to that, and how to honor that in a way that didn't feel like the weird disembodied announcement that happens at the beginning of things that is completely unconnected and not really, you know what I mean? Everybody just turning off the phone and not really engaged with the thing, right? And so it was about trying to find a way, linking Maxine's experience with slam poetry. So it was a way to kind of tie form, content, and I guess politics, in a way, into the way that we started the work, begin the show, in a way that also feels very honest or something. We're all here. Yes, we're in a theater, but I can see you. Yes, we're doing the acknowledgement now because that's, yes, it's, help to kind of ground it in a here and now.
So that brings us to an end, everybody.
I think Alana just had something that we wanted to add. Did you?
It was just that through all that discussion about First Nations people, Nellie was like prodding me in the back saying, read that bit that I said in People in 1952. So I think it's fitting to give Nellie the last word. She was talking about Dorothy Hall, an Australian Aboriginal dancer who she'd had a season with at the Sydney nightclub. Dorothy's still alive. She's an amazing Indigenous dancer. And Nellie said they turn up their noses at this little girl, yet she's got more culture in her little finger than they have in their whole bodies. And she said that in 1952, so go Nellie.
Yay.
Thank you, panellists. Thank you, everybody who's made the effort to get out on a Thursday night, a weeknight. It's been wonderful to have a room full of friends, colleagues, and people involved with or part of the Caribbean community. So it's a lovely, lovely occasion. And please stick around to listen to some tunes. Take it away, Amma.